The Sound Off Podcast. The show about podcast and broadcast. Starts now.
Sharon, do you remember the first time we met?
Was it at Podcast Movement?
Yeah.
I have a memory of you coming up to me and being like, Australia, but is that wrong?
That was another time.
Oh gosh, oh my gosh. It's been a long time. Like I started at Omny in 2016, knowing no one in the industry, and yeah, now it's all blurred into one big conference.
We were seated beside each other at a dinner in 2017.
How do you remember that?
I remember everything.
Oh my gosh. Is that a blessing and a curse?
Well, it turned out to be a blessing, actually,
Thank
the
you.
way...
Yes, me too.
Yeah, I mean, you had a lot to do with my company. I think that dinner sort of changed the trajectory of what we were doing at that time.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. Oh.
Because back then you were with Omny.
Correct.
But I'm curious to know, what did you do before that?
Oh, I did a lot of things before Omny. So I'd always worked in tech. So I'd spent the better part of a decade working at like a managed IT services firm and looked after kind of like operations. So did like HR and accounts. Like it was a small company, and so we multitasked, much like startups. And so I did like HR, accounts. I ran like a web team. We did app development. We built like a SaaS product. We managed like a fleet of technicians. And then way before that, I was in hospitality management. And so I, at one point, thought I was going to be a big hotelier. And then my life took a series of left turns that I couldn't be happier about. And now I'm in podcasting.
Why is it that the odd turns in life are always left ones?
I know. And I had so much fear about, because I moved from one side of Australia to the other on a whim. And I really, like, it was like a huge amount of personal stuff rolled up in it to me as well, because the people I was leaving behind and that company I'd worked for had become like family. And I just thought, you've got to see if there's more that you can do professionally. And yeah, and I fell into Omny doing a 8-week contract to come in and put like some business riggers in place where I figured out what else I was going to do over there. And it just escalated and turned into the literal best thing that I've done in my professional and maybe personal life as well.
The roots of this podcast, by the way, are in radio. And a lot of people knew Omny Studio because it offered radio tools. Oh, man, as far back as I can remember. I mean, I think I started using it 2010, 11, 12 in there.
SoundGecko was the first product, and that was 2011, I think, which they did like text to speech. But yeah, that's before my time. But they tell stories of launching at radio days way back in the day. And because Omny had built this way to capture live stream and turn it into on-demand content, either whole podcasts or bite-sized like sound bites for social media, etc., there was a queue of people around their booth at, the things that we all dream of now at conferences. There they were, 3 brilliant guys and an incredible dev team.
And so what did somebody say? I'm guessing who it might have been, but was it Long?
It was Long.
Yeah, so it was Long Zen who looked at you and said, come and be a part of the team. What did he see?
Long is, for anyone that knows him, he is like hyperlogical and rational and like just querying to an extent. And so I don't know what he saw. I know that they, like I think many startups, are technically brilliant and they have the visionary, but what they often lack is the ability to turn that into maybe not even action, because they had lots of momentum, but like business rigor and, ability to operationalize things. And I think he logically saw what they were missing on the team, and that's kind of with a hole that I filled and allowed them to do other things. Like before I came in, Long was the one who was doing a lot of the board interfacing and, figuring out pricing and those types of things. And that's just not a good use of a person's time who's so brilliant at coding and things.
So you're head of operations, but then you're CEO.
Yes, it was a wild ride. So we went from head of ops, and I took an 8-week contract just to kind of help them. Like it was such a nascent product, and figuring out how to do pricing or, what a P&L might look like and those types of things. And then that turned into a full-time contract to do operations. And then it moved into like the CEO took an opportunity to exit and move on to do his next thing, as all CEOs do. And then all of a sudden I was interim CEO, and then I was full-time CEO. Yeah, it all happened very quickly, to be honest.
So it's funny that you mentioned pricing, and that maybe Long shouldn't be the person who sits and worries about stuff like that. But in our conversation that we had, that first dinner that we had together, I asked you, I said, why is it that for dynamic audio insertion, it costs, and I thought it was a ridiculously low price, or I thought it was an affordable price. I said, why is the price at that level? Because I'd only been exposed to working with podcasters who were charging exorbitant amounts of money. And you turned to me and you just said, because we just want people to use it. And this is 2017, and not everybody knows how to use this tool.
Yes, correct. Yeah. I mean, they had been free for a long time. I think the freemium model works in a very specific set of use cases. We have another CMS in the Triton stack now. It's called Spreaker, and they have a freemium offering. And it's because at scale and the volume that they have, it really makes sense for them. But yeah, we just wanted, like, it was that part of the product life cycle. Like, we were ready for people to come on board and just get started. In hindsight, it probably hindered us a little bit because we had huge radio organizations who were signing up online to our plans for, like $100 or $200. And so probably like it had its pros and cons. But yeah, it was interesting as a time when I think back at the work that we did and what we like pulled out of our hats as pricing, and a lot of it in startup, especially on a SaaS platform, you feel like you're just throwing darts at a dartboard and then just measuring it to see like what sticks. And yeah, it turns out that it worked.
And you're one of those operations that has many different clientele. You've got small podcasters, you've got lots of indies, you've got some tiny startups like myself who started to grow and went from 1 podcast to 35 podcasts. And then you've got these big radio companies. And it's, I mean, we know how much podcasters make. We know how much radio people make. That's a huge chasm. So how did you come to sort of like land between, how do we balance both of this to make sure everyone's included in podcasting?
True. And I think there's like an Omny historically and then an Omny kind of now as well. Like back then we were really trying to like serve all edges of the market. Podcasting was so new that, to your point, like someone that was starting out more easily, I think, than now could become a huge show. And it was really the time, like a year or so after that, that shows were either forming networks themselves or banding together and joining networks. Whereas now I think that's a little bit different. And so we really needed to like do a catch-all and see what happened with it. Now in the stack, we've got Omny, who is geared to more like the enterprise, the radio, the commercial publishers, and then Spreaker, who is geared for like independents, people that don't want to join a network but are very large individual podcasts and want to control their own destiny, And so I think in the company now we've evolved to have something as an offering for everyone, and it's just changed that it no longer is Omny.
In 2017, when we were at that dinner, did you think podcasting would evolve to where it is today? Have there been any surprises?
I'd hoped. It's not often in your either career or personal life or professional life, even like if you're like industry adjacent, that you get to see something like what happened in podcasting from when we went through it back then. It really was the hobbyist, hey, there's something here, riding the wave and becoming this professional medium that still has challenges, obviously, and is still so small compared to other marketing spends. But no, I didn't. Like, I remember Spotify getting involved and them sending us a licensor agreement so they could start putting podcasting on their app. I don't know what I thought or hoped it would be. I hoped really like to just, turn the startup into a large commercial entity, and doing that needed like more listens. I think we still are at the kind of like a plateau. We need more people in podcasting, but I can't be unhappy with how it turned out.
I love how you're not afraid of moves. But I do want to ask you before we get to talking a little bit about moves. Triton buys Omny. And Triton,
2019.
Yeah, in 2019. So, and you go along for the ride, because sometimes when there's a purchase, it's like, is Sharon going to be going along for the ride on this? And it turns out, yes.
I did, yes.
And it's a big yes. And there's another purchase that happens a little bit later where iHeart, buys Triton. So can you talk a little bit about, what you had to go through in terms of changes from a CEO perspective, and how do you handle one, let alone two?
Well, I mean, so before iHeart, Scripps owned Triton, and Triton for a long time had been private equity owned, and so they also went through some changes. And then after Scripps acquired Triton, they had their eyes on us. Luckily, we'd worked with Triton for 2 years beforehand. We had like a reseller, lead gen, and so we knew the team, and we knew that they weren't, there's an Australian word that I could use, but I think you'd have to bleep it out. Like, we knew they were good people, and we worked well with them, and we didn't have to post-acquisition build up that knowledge. Like, I've had people and friends that have obviously sold their companies, lots of people in the podcast industry, and then all of a sudden you are navigating who is the C-suite. I've had like a few DD meetings with you, but like, who are you? What do you want me to do? And so we'd already planned that out, and we already knew, and so that was really, really helpful. But obviously there are pros and cons. Like, there is an agility and a autonomy and control in being, a small startup. Like, we were 5 people when we sold to Triton, and moving into a larger entity comes with a need to adapt, obviously, and you get like some huge benefits. Like, do you need to have your own marketing? Like, I was a marketing team and now I had a marketing team. I was a legal team and now I had a legal team. I was a HR team and now I had a HR team. And so I think as long as you lean into it, like, that kind of helped us.
So there's going to be a move involved. You'd already mentioned that you moved, probably it was Perth to Melbourne, perhaps?
Correct. Yes, yeah.
Right. So, because you mentioned it was far, and that's in Australia, I think the equivalent in Canada would be a Montreal to Vancouver.
I agree. I think I'm no geography expert, but I think that Australia is the same dimensions or square meterage, I don't know, acreage. What is geography of like to Canada? So yeah, it would be the same as like BC to Quebec.
Yeah, and so, but then an even bigger move comes along where you're going to be going Melbourne to Montreal.
Yes, correct.
And that's a crazy move.
It is. I mean, to your point earlier, a lot of people, when they sell their companies, they do what's called rest and vest, and so they get their earn out, and then the time comes and they move on. Some people are more entrepreneurial minded. Like, I'm not a CEO that starts companies. I'm a CEO, or I was a COO that came in and operationalized, and so there was no like real impetus to suddenly go, okay, great, I've done 2 years and then off I go. So it's been a long, like 5 years now since I was with Triton. And I was doing my job from Australia, traveling lots and getting up at like stupid o'clock to do meetings, because anyone that has run a business and has tried to turn it into an international business from Australia or from a country and get into other markets, you need to be in that time zone. Shortly after selling, like, the pandemic hit and travel went away and the job became even harder. And I think I had 2 choices. One was call it a day and thank, the industry for, a great time with Omny and Triton, or make a change. And John Rosso, the CEO of Triton, was really supportive and encouraging of like that change. And so I moved up to Montreal. A long time ago, Triton bought a company called Stream the World that was based here, and so they have a huge Montreal entity. It was easy-ish to get the work permit to come up, and I just thought, why not? I've got nothing to lose and everything to gain.
I remember Stream the World.
Stream the World, yep.
Yeah.
And then there was a company in the US called Ando Media that was theirs as well. Triton has a huge history of acquiring companies. So does iHeart, which kind of makes it easier as well to put one small company into a large one, because you are dealing with people that have done it multiple times.
So the culture shock from somebody from Toronto who moves to Montreal is immense, which tells me everything about Torontonians more than about anything else, because there's a big center of the universe kind of approach to the way they live.
And how they pronounce their name as well. I would say Toronto, but they say Toronto?
Yep.
Great, nailing it. Yep.
Yeah.
Take note, Canadian Visa Department. I've learned how to say one of your cities' names.
Yeah, and I'm sure people are going to at me on that stuff, but it's what I've always sort of found and known. I felt when I lived and worked in Montreal, I had to be a cultural Sherpa for anybody who had come from the rest of Canada to go into Montreal, but here you are, you go from Australia right into Montreal. Any culture shock? Any sort of oh wow moments where you go, oh, this is a little bit different than what I'm used to?
I mean, the French is definitely, like, we don't really, like, Australia is very multicultural, but we're also very English focused, obviously, and to hear French spoken on a street was quite jarring. It also is part of the romance of this place and why people come here, you know, even from the US, and want to spend time here. Luckily, I'd been here before because, like I said, we've worked with Triton for a few years before the acquisition, so I knew largely my way around. It is always hard to move cities or countries, like, and someone once said to me that if you're an expat that has moved overseas, you move because you no longer feel like your home country is really like where you belong, and then you move somewhere and you also sort of don't feel like that is completely where you belong. Culture shock wise, the poutine, like the love of like cheese curds. Someone said to me that if cheese curds don't squeak, they're not good.
They're no
I don't
good.
understand. I don't understand that.
Yeah, they're no good.
Roadworks here are everywhere all the time. And then I think the snow was the biggest like change. Like, do you know your face can freeze?
Oh, absolutely. I'm in
I
Winnipeg.
didn't know that. I just thought it snowed and it was magical, like a Hallmark movie. But no, it's really cold sometimes, and we don't have that in Australia.
Yeah, and
There's
I know
more similarities than differences, though, I think.
I know Winnipeg gets sort of flagged for the -30, but it's a dry cold. In Montreal, it can be -10, and it's so damp that your
Yes.
face will freeze.
Yes.
You will. I've had. I think my ear froze once. I had a little bit of ear exposing, and I went skiing in -15. Big mistake.
Oh my gosh. I'm the
Frostbite.
clumsiest person you'll ever meet, so you'll never get me on a ski slope. My friends are amazed that I haven't slipped over and died here in Montreal on the icy sidewalks. But snow management, the efficiency of it, like, I'd love to see some data on that. But yeah, it's a different
Well,
one.
what data would you like? I can get that for you.
Oh, can you?
What would you like?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'd love to understand like snow maintenance over the years. I'd love to understand like if it's increased, decreased, like their approach to snow maintenance and like what learnings and everything they've had. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean the when I was young and I grew up there, they used to toss the snow onto the lawn. And then the salt would catch in there, so they stopped doing that. And then they put the trucks beside the blowers, and then they started to just basically they line the trucks up, and then the trucks will cart the snow down to the river, and they'll dump it in the river. So
That's
I mean,
pretty
if you've ever wanted to know why the river's a bit of a mess, that might have a little bit to do with it. But I think the real key is that you want to get rid of the snow. I mean, obviously for the parking spots. But, once it all starts to melt, it all starts to run downhill. And then you get what happened just last week, which was you can get some floods. You can get all sorts of unseemly stuff and whatnot.
Snow
But I've
is
watched
great until it turns to slush, and then it's a pant killer as well.
I've watched the budget go up, by the way, for snow removal.
Oh, good.
And I do keep my eye on it. I think it's in the range of about $70 million for the city. So now you know why your local taxes are so high.
Okay, so you can cut this out if this isn't interesting, but like I think that the taxes in Quebec are so high. I would like, in America how they've got adopt a highway? Mm-hmm. I would like to adopt a pothole. Like I would like to know that my taxes in Montreal especially are going to filling in, and I'd like to be able to walk to work and see all the roadworks that are disrupting my path and being like, oh, that's so cute, that pothole. I filled that in.
So we did that one day as a radio stunt, and we went and put earth and flowers into every pothole that we could find along St. Catherine Street,
Oh my gosh.
and we dared people to run them over.
I did that in year 6. We graduated. I don't know why you graduate in year 6, but we went running out into the oval, and the groundskeepers had just planted some trees, and it was dark, and we ran out and like all the little trees. I don't think anyone know that. If the groundskeeper is listening to this, I'm so sorry. But yeah, St. Catherine is now under renovation again for pedestrian.
Yeah, for the 30th year in a row.
Crazy, yeah.
Yeah.
And we're all like, please be finished before winter, but they won't be.
And one of the nice things about where you live now is that we get to see you more at Canadian events. I had a chance to see you at Radio Days North America,
Yes.
and I love it when you're on stage because again the filter it's already disappeared. So conversations about podcast metrics and it usually starts with the download, and then you'll interrupt or interject at that point. And so this year you're on a panel, and I think there was a lot of ad buyers who were there. So how do you feel about the way podcasting is measured and the download specifically?
There's a lot of people that want to throw the download out. I think that the download is one of those metrics which is like, it's the best that we have. There's still no standard in podcasting. There are guidelines that are put together by the IAB, and we all follow them, or most of the hosting companies follow them. Triton has a metrics product that ingests logs from multiple companies, runs the same filtering over it, because even if you say you're IAB 2.1 or 2.2 compliant, there are nuances in how you run things and how you display, and you really need to be able to compare apples to apples, as the saying goes. What's different now, I think, is that there are more companies that are making listening available, and I think that's a really important thing that we should move to in terms of understanding more about how content is consumed and what people are enjoying and getting good data. I'm just hesitant to say that we should move to the listen as the ideal standard, because there are challenges to that. Like, podcasting was built in RSS. The genie got out of the bottle before we were able to really think about this digital/traditional medium, and we've continued to grapple with that since I've moved into the space.
Yeah, interestingly, I think back a few years, and I'm not sure if it's still available because it's been a little while since I've been inside the Omny tool, but there were consumption metrics that were provided inside, but I think they were based only on the actual Omny player, which was the stuff that you would have access to. And so I thought, okay, well, useful, somewhat useful. I'd love to have my Apple and I'd love to have my Spotify in there. And a couple of weeks ago, we did have Dan Meisner from Bumper, who's just beginning to bring that in, and has given us, by the way, a test run on their new tool from Bumper, and you can just wind back a couple of episodes or just go to the episode page and you can see some of the stuff in there. So I don't know if you've had a chance to see it or understand what they're up to and what they've unveiled. But to be able to put Apple and Spotify and YouTube consumption metrics, how would you integrate that, and how important is it?
I think it is important to give an overview view of how your podcast or podcasts are being consumed. I think that iOS 17, like, the reason that we want to get to listening as an industry is really important, which is it a download that is a user-initiated download, and was it listened to? Is it a download that, is because you've got auto downloads enabled, or, anything else that's going on with RSS? And so I love the idea of being able to look at actual consumption versus downloads. I think that, again, moving only to that gives me pause, just because, like, I travel a lot, you travel a lot. Before you get on a plane, are you like me? I download 20 episodes of something that I want to listen to.
Absolutely, and I listened to 3 of them.
Mm-hmm. And I get through them all eventually. And so that is the problem, right? Like, the difference between those things, and if you only move to a full listing model, you kind of cut that out. And so we're all just kind of doing the best that we can, I think, at the moment. Listening on Apple and Spotify is crucial to understand, like, how your numbers are shaping up. When we talk to publishers and they look at their download numbers on those platforms comparative to their listening numbers, there's not usually a lot of difference. Like, there is obviously, some that have got a delta, but it's not like there's 10 downloads. Sorry, it's not like there's 10 listens and like 10,000 downloads. And I think sometimes that's the view that people hold, that, like, your listening data is going to be like 100x more or less than your download numbers. And I think that the more that listening data from people like Dan can go out into the world, maybe at the same time we could, like, try and improve the narrative around the fact that downloads, if we could narrow the gap a little bit, I think that would be really behoove us all.
Yeah, I'm glad we're having this conversation, but at the same time, there's somebody in an ad buying position who's listening to this conversation and saying, see, well, the metrics are no good. See, and again, I remember Radio Days North America, and I don't remember which year it was. At some point, you had to raise your microphone and say, I'd like to challenge that.
Sounds like me.
Yeah, and I think I recall you saying that to an ad buyer, why are you picking on the podcasting metrics and the way we're doing our counting? You're using television and radio. And radio, they're still writing things down. And television, we don't even know if people are watching. They could have gone to make themselves a sandwich and had a bath and a shower and a sauna and just left the TV on.
Yep.
And so, it's the level of acceptability between. So do you find yourself being, sort of in a, the Jehovah's Witness podcast metrics person in most scenarios?
No. What concerns me is that we're very eager to get up on stage and openly debate these things. And that conversation is really important. Sometimes I think it's very unique to podcasting. Like, we still seem like Oliver Twist at the advertising table of like, please, sir, may I have some more? And every time we get up and we talk about the failure of the download is a baseline and it should be standardized, and then you should be able to augment things. Maybe with listening data, maybe it does move to where TV panels and, radio panels and survey methodology move to, which is, okay, here's a sample and then we can extrapolate that out. Like, if we could get to even 10%, 20%, I don't know what that listening number is, to say this percentage of data that shows listening is the same type of listener as the people who are downloading en masse. And we could maybe bridge that gap a little bit. But yeah, it does concern me. I think that all industries have these problems. On some level, I like the fact that we're talking about it, because it means that we are like putting on our big boy pants and sitting at the table, and it's no longer a backyard medium, it is like a full professional medium. But yeah, I think the education of buyers, especially the buyers who are yet to enter the space, is a tricky one.
For the radio side, it's like, well, we have all these radio ratings. And then somebody sort of said to me once, well, what is a radio rating if you have a 4.7? It's really just a number that is used to facilitate a transaction between the buyer and the seller of the advertiser. And I sort of look, downloads can be like that. But again, it has its limitations.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
And now, to your earlier point, like, we're getting a little bit murkier. Like, we've got YouTube, so Podcast Metrics at Triton will pull through YouTube views as well of a podcast show. YouTube measures it in a completely different way to anyone else, like, as do all other digital mediums. I think that we want to be really thoughtful as an industry of what we wish for, because there could be a world where all the buying just moves to like a Spotify or a YouTube, and that doesn't really give buyers what they want in terms of access. And that's a really beneficial narrative to be pushing for some large corporate entities, and maybe doesn't help the people who are still just getting started in podcasting and want to, access the same types of dollars.
What is brand safety?
What is brand safety? Brand safety is a way for a buyer to ask for a set of like industry standards to be run against content. It could be podcast content, which is just starting and getting started. It is display, etc., to make sure that where their ad is appearing is something that is suitable for their brand. I think that brand safety has a lot of negative connotations, like, oh, we're going to it's hate speech, or it's this or it's that. It really just means that a brand has ideals about what they want to run against, and what is suitable for them is what they want to appear in.
And at the same time, I'm hearing a lot from listeners who come back to me and go, why was I served those ads? Why did I get those? Mm-hmm. So what's in place really to, not only from the advertiser's perspective for brand safety, but to really sort of customize the ad experience for listeners? Is there anything at the other end?
I think so. I mean, I think podcast advertising is it's getting less messy, but there's still like a range of baked-in ads, faked-in ads, dynamically inserted ads that are direct sold, programmatic ads. And what you hear as a listener is largely dependent on the show and the economics of that show. Like, the show might be selling a single ad across all territories because they want to just sell their entire impressions. James Cridland talks about this a lot, where he's in Australia and he gets ads for US businesses that he can't access or buy the services or products of. And so if you're a listener, you might get a different ad based on your geography, based on, an ad sales contract that someone has put together. Like, a large US publisher might outsource their ad sales to a specific house in Australia or England or, you know, all those types of things. You might get some like DMP advertising. So it's very similar to other audio styles where, you know, your IP address, you want to be a car buyer. I don't know if anyone knows this about DMP data, but 99% of people are car intenders. And so you might get a car ad. And there's a range of things, like you can do show targeting and other bits and pieces. Brand suitability software and the running doesn't just stop you as a brand from going, I don't want to be around topics like that flag for, you know, arms and ammunition or any of those like 13 core topics. It also allows you to say, okay, what contextually do I want to be around? Maybe I want to be in sports episodes instead of sports podcast shows. And so it allows you to kind of have your ad in a greater amount of inventory. Maybe you want to target any shows that are talking about Paris or sporting or the Olympics so that you can target your ad more intently for someone that's ready to, like, is actively listening to that content. And so you as a listener can get it in many, many different ways.
So podcasters, so in podcasting, there's so much to choose from. Like you mentioned, there's sports, you can get a podcast just about anything. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think has come up in discussion, and I've noticed it too, trying to, you know, sell, is that sometimes they're pretty hard. Buyers are pretty steadfast about, I don't want news because of the news.
Yes.
And I don't want true crime. And I'm like, you don't want true crime? That's like our biggest podcast. Yeah. And the completion rate is huge. Why wouldn't you want this?
Right. And the demographics of true crime listeners, like they are affluent, intelligent, like it's a female audience largely, like, but I think, I don't know, I've joked before that I thought that there was like a hole in the market for like a bleach company or like a bathtub or like a rope purveyor to like advertise on true crime podcasts. And that's, I hope, funny, but also indicative of the problem, right? Which is like we think about this true crime podcast and it's, you know, gore or it's talking about things. And, you know, maybe just Disney doesn't want to be around those types of ads. I think that it is challenging. I think that it takes a more handheld approach to talking about like what the show is and to show them like how you'll be talking about things. Fiction podcasts have the same problem because it's very evergreen content and to sell in like certain runs is difficult. News especially, you know, has always been, I think, tricky just because lots of advertisers who are buying news in paper form or like print or online already have the brand safety tools where they say, I don't want to be around, like, one example that came up the other day is the word gun or any formats of it. And brand safety software, if it's going beyond the keyword, especially in audio, should be able to understand the context of what is being spoken about. So I could say that I'm gunning for your job, or man, that guy was a gun on the track, like in terms of a sporting podcast. Most news publishers just have a list and they just don't, that's how they get to what they do and don't want to be included in.
So I'm going to elevate your joke.
Good.
And I would like to, and I'll voice the ad, and we can do it in Quebec for Renault Depot, Home Depot, and this is Home Depot, and we're going to give you all the tools to be a part of your own podcast.
Right.
Come on down to get some rope, ammonia, and anything that will get the blood out of the carpets.
Like, there's no brand in the world that would do that, I think. Or, I mean, it would be a very unique brand. Side note, there's a great true crime fiction podcast called Sorry About the Murder that is based in Quebec, and you would love it. Like, it's by Fable and Folly. It's really good.
Mark down and in the show notes of this episode and on the episode page at soundoffpodcast.com.
But it is challenge. Like, I don't know. There are horror stories of brand safety going awry in other medium. You know, like there's all those, like whenever you watch a presentation about it or you look at things, there's a news story about like an airplane disaster and then an ad for flights sales comes up because it's been like contextually targeted but not in the right way. And I think that podcasting, there's this notion of there's a lot of content out there and you're not going to be able to kind of like vet every show. A lot of agencies and advertisers who are working with a network understand those shows, right? Like and that's how they sell, because they understand what they're buying. I think that where brand safety and suitability comes into it for me is that there are a lot of buyers that have not entered podcasting yet, and there is a lot of or lowly monetized content because they aren't part of a network that can get in front of these agencies. And as the medium matures, those buyers are going to expect the same types of controls that they can get in other mediums. And it's our job as an industry to help provide those for the buyers so that we can shepherd their dollars through the door. And so I think that it's really early days. Obviously, GARM getting disbanded is not ideal for the podcast industry at the moment, but it also could be an opportunity to innovate. Like, GARM was never really fit for purpose perfectly for podcasting. They have nudity and things like that, and that's not something that you have to worry about seeing on a podcast. Although now that video is becoming part of podcasting, maybe that is a thing. And so I think it's just we're riding that wave, and we are about to have another flux of podcast buying, and that brand suitability is just part of that.
And tell me a little bit about Sounder, which is a tool that I don't want to say recently unveiled, because I know you've been talking about it for a while, but tell me about Sounder and how it does sort of lend itself into, finding the right fits.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is recent. Like, we acquired them at the end of March of this year. And so obviously Triton has a few different pieces in our portfolio. We've got Omny and Spreaker, who are CMS platforms. We have Triton Audio Marketplace, which is the world's largest audio SSP, so it's where all the programmatic transacting happens. And we have, direct sold, we have measurement, we have all these different pieces. And so Sounder for us just made a lot of sense to acquire. It's an AI machine learning platform that analyzes podcast audio, has proprietary models built on both the IAB and GARM standard, and analyzes the audio in segments and contextually for those topics, to say, hey, look, this is how it rates, either from a non-related to related or a low to high scale for the IAB and GARM brand suitability and brand safety categories, and also pulls out things like named entities, transcript search terms, IAB categories at an episode and like segment level. It does a whole range of other things. And it just was such a perfect fit for us. Like, for my opinion, is that for brand suitability and contextual to really hum in podcasting, you need to own every piece of the stack. You have to have the CMS because you want to kind of get the episodes analyzed before it escapes into the wild, and then you lose monetization opportunities. You want it enabled in an ad server because you don't really want to have to rely on having an ad run, hoping that the targeting was correct, and then doing some sort of analysis after the fact to correlate what the episode talked about with where the ad ran. And so because we own all the different pieces, we can control that for a buyer and give them a level of like security and peace of mind. And so it just, at the moment, we're in the midst of taking it out to publishers on Omny, Spreaker, and Megaphone it integrates with as well, and any other CMS that is interested, to kind of allow them to have access to these tools, and then putting it into the programmatic marketplace as well, so that we can ideally get more buying in and increase the liquidities and get more dollars for everyone. Then we can all have a money fight and throw like $100 bills at each other's face.
Well, earlier on, you mentioned that as podcasters, we should all be paid in gruel. Oliver Twist reference.
The worst thing I ever did when I was starting out in podcasting is I went to go and speak at, this isn't the worst thing, if they're listening. James and Matt will be angry with me the way that came out. I went to go and speak at the Next Radio conference that James Cridland and Matt Deegan used to put on in London. And I was very new to the game, and I was talking about podcast monetization, which for anyone entering the space now, if you think it's confusing now, it was hectic back then. And I had 2 images, like an expectation reality, and they were animated GIFs. And one was Scrooge McDuck swimming into the money pit, and the other was Family Guy did an episode where they talked about the physics of that, and like Peter Griffin jumped into the pit and broke all of his bones, and it was really graphic. And I just timed my speech so poorly, Matt. And the GIF of Family Guy just jumping into a pit and being graphic for like 2 minutes just kept playing, and I could see people kind of starting to do this. And that is where brand suitability would have worked for me in a presentation format.
I mean, it's okay to learn the hard way, right?
I did learn the hard way. Yeah, but I've had some incredible lessons over the years.
Thank you, by the way, for talking about the move from Australia to Montreal.
Of course.
But now I'm going to ask you to do sort of the same thing, but from the business side of podcasting in Canada. Mm-hmm. I have this feeling from the number of people that I talk that we are at a disadvantage. But before I go and taint your answer, with your worldly view that you have, because you know Australia, you know New Zealand, you've got the Triton rankers, you've got all the data. Mm-hmm. Can you summarize Canada for me? Good news, bad news, either or, in terms of podcasting.
I think Canada is very similar to Australia in terms of podcasting. Like, it's a smaller population, which means that we are naturally at a disadvantage from somewhere like the US, where, you know, the market is just so much bigger for everything, not just podcasting. It's largely dominated by radio. And so in Australia, radio joined forces. They all had like a podcast network that they built. And that really behooved the industry because everyone had shared goals, common interests, and it kind of moved the market forward in terms of measurement and, you know, advertising and a few other bits and pieces. They were all in lockstep. Canada has that same opportunity, but I don't feel that radio has really lent in the same way that Australia did. And then I think that Canadian podcast networks make some amazing content up here, but they are dealing with the same ad buying teams that are used to buying in America. And so then those ad buyers are used to seeing American style numbers. And then instantly when they see Canadian style numbers, they just go, oh, that's quite small. Or they want to bundle both in, like it's North America as opposed to Canada and the US. And so I think there's some challenges for sure.
Yeah, so a lot of the network people that I speak to, when it, you know, some have even gone so far as to say, well, we really don't have a podcast industry in Canada. And I think it's easy to feel alone. And I think it's easy to say, well, if you want to do this full time, and I do think this is true, that you do need to have ads. You need to have direct sales. You need to have programmatic, and you need to have maybe some bonus Patreon or something along those lines. And, you know, the many different tiers of money along the way. And so do you see in the future it becoming easier for a Canadian creator to bust through?
That's a good question. There's a few different paths, I suppose. I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, a lot of podcasters and podcast networks have joined other larger networks. I think remaining independent as a podcast network purely in Canada, unless you can swallow up a lot of the shows and join forces and gain a significant amount of downloads or listens, will always be challenging. But I think also there's an opportunity to change a mindset. You don't need to be advertising driven. Like you could, like there are, you know, Apple Premium, you know, the Patreon, etc. models that people could look to. But yeah, the economics need to work for sure.
Last question. Favorite Montreal restaurant?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I do have a favorite, but I selfishly want, like, it's my local bar that does incredible food. It's sensational. And it's so busy all the time, and every time I see them advertise on Instagram, I think, no, we don't want any others. There is a bar, a restaurant, a pub, a bistro pub called Nick's in Montreal, down near Complexe des Jardins, Place des Arts, and it is phenomenal. Like, it is, if you like brews, if you're Australian, like, you'll love it. The food is out of this world. It is sensational. The bar staff, all lovely. Like, I'm there a shameful amount because I don't know how to cook. Like,
what are you going to order?
The word I learned in French was micro-ondes, which is microwave, because that's how I make most of my food. Cut that out. That's terrible. Don't tell people that. That's my private shame.
I'm leaving it in. It's okay.
I mean, I microwave good things. Someone convinced me to buy an air fryer as well. That's kind of changed my life.
Oh, you have the air fryer?
I do.
So what are we ordering at Nick's?
Sorry, what are we ordering at Nick's? So they always have different plat du moment, like different specials of the day. They always have an amazing fish that's on. My friend that goes with me always gets mushroom pappardelle, sensational. They have the most amazing olive tapenade. It is incredible. They do a bison burger for those of you that like to consume burgers and beef. I could go on.
Sharon, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's been, I mean, I can't believe it's taken you this long to be on. I don't know. It's probably my fault, but thanks so much for doing it after all these years.
Continents.
Yeah. So much easier when you're one time zone away.
Yes, correct. Yeah, scheduling in the worst time zone in the world is hard. But thank you. It's been so fun. Thanks for asking.
The Sound Off Podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.